Hey, welcome back to Max Nave Horsemanship. Glad you could join me again today. And, I thought we'd just give you some random ramblings to entertain you during the holiday season because right now we're going through a bit of a cold snap and it is way too cold to be doing the things that I'd really, truly like to be doing. And we're almost kind of where we need to be because right through this window down there is a freshly groomed arena that not a single footprint in there yet from the horses because, well, it's been too cold for absolutely anybody to come out here and do anything and use the arena. What does that ever look nice from up here? Anyhow, yeah, that's the arena right there. That's where I do most of my videos down in there. That wall over there. You've seen that one lots. Actually, you've seen pretty much all the walls in there. But I thought I'd talk today a bit about, since it's way too cold to be down there with horses right now. Okay, tomorrow's looking a lot better. Maybe we'll do something tomorrow, but at the moment, not a chance. Not happening. And what we're going to do today, though, is we're actually going to talk a tiny bit about the weather. Yeah, like we really need to. Who wants to talk about the weather? Anyhow, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about farriers, trimmers, that sort of thing. And I'm going to show you some of the tools that I use and talk about some of the pros and cons of the various tools that I use too. And I have a few things on this table here. Actually, some of them are just out of sight. You can't quite see them, but I know you can see the top of this one. That's my hoof stand, and that's the sling that you can see. And but this is all homemade. You can actually buy them though, but this particular one is homemade. And I talk about that too because I actually made some mistakes when I made that one. That it's not horrible. It's not. I didn't screw up real bad, but it could have been better. And I'm going to talk about that in just a second. I'm going to talk about a few of the tools I got and what I would change if I got the chance to, which eventually I will. At least some of them, anyhow. Some I have already changed, actually. But, well, while editing the video, I realized I never did talk about the weather, which, well, not something we normally like to talk about. But in this case, you got to understand why I was in that room that I was in while doing the video, aside from the fact that it was close to where all the tools were. It also happened to be heated. And that's one of the features we have here is we have a heated observation room up top where you can look out over the arena in the comfort of some warmth. It's not a lot at this temperature, but and the reason we were in there was because today it was actually with the wind chill minus 40. And it was only minus 30 something, but with the wind chill it's minus 40, and it doesn't matter if you're Celsius or Fahrenheit. And minus 40, the two scales join up, both the same. And it's been like that for about a week. And in fact, just a couple days ago it was even worse. Our wind chills, I believe, were minus 53. So that's why we haven't been doing much out there. And that's why this video is in a nice warm place. And that's why I didn't go back outside to throw this little part in. But I thought maybe you needed to know this stuff. That's just how drastic the conditions can be. It's not always that cold. Sometimes we get mild winters, but minus 30, minus 40, even worse, not unheard of. And I've seen it before, and I'll probably see it again. But I just thought I'd let you know this is what we got to deal with. So there you go. That's why we're hiding out. I want to talk a little bit about farriers and trimmers, and I've talked about them before. I've done several videos on, the worth of a farrier and that sort of thing. And people really, truly do underestimate the value of a good farrier. Somebody that is going to treat your animal well, and assuming you actually know much about trimming, you can tell the difference between whether or not they're doing a good trim. And, and they're reliable. And they show up, and even just recently there's been a couple of farriers that have not returned calls, have failed to keep appointments, the one guy in particular, he just vanished. Nobody even knows where he went. And it's not the first time he's done that, apparently. So these are the kinds of things that can happen and will happen, unfortunately. So when you find somebody that is reliable, that shows up, answers their phone, treats your animals good, and does a decent trim, never mind how much they charge. Because, this is something I want to talk a little bit about. And I mentioned it in just a recent video in preparation for the Farrier, and I've mentioned it in other videos. I really don't think that most of them are charging near enough. But then again, some of them, never mind how much they charge, I wouldn't even let them near my horse. But we won't go there, because then we'd have to be getting a little personal. And no, I don't want to go there. I don't want to do that. We're not going to get personal. But we're going to generalize. The value of your horse. What is your horse worth to you? Because, the thing that I find very astounding is the amount of money that most people pay for a trim is, well, assuming you're a regular coffee drinker, if you were to buy coffee out at, say, Starbucks, never mind that stuff, but, if you were to, buy takeout coffee somewhere where you are paying a buck and a half, I don't know, whatever they charge these days for a cup of coffee. I make my own, by the way, way cheaper. But if you total up how much you spend in an 8-week span, which is the typical cycle that most people would have for trimming their horse, I am willing to bet that you probably spend more on coffee than you do on your trims. Just do the math on it. And that's why I say I got real upset in my last video I did about this, is that people will, and I've seen it happen many times, where people would actually switch farriers just to save $5, because one guy will do it $5 cheaper than the other. And as far as I'm concerned, even the guy that's doing it for $5 more isn't charging enough. And just recently, I was rather encouraged. I finally saw somebody that was charging enough. And it was, well, actually, I think there's a lady has a couple horses here. And typical of farriers, her regular farrier that she had been using, who did a good job, and she tipped well to the point where she had 2 horses, and to do both horses, it was still costing her, I think, $160 or something, and something in that neighborhood, or 170, I don't recall. No, sorry, 140, whatever, it doesn't matter. Well, they stopped returning her calls for some reason, even though they said they would for sure show up to remove the shoes and then trim them for the winter and all this good stuff. Never showed up. They finally had to get a hold of somebody else. They'd never used this individual before, but I happened to be present when they were doing their job. And it was a young lady that I don't know how much experience she actually had, but she certainly seemed to know what she was doing. And she treated the horses well. She did a decent trim. She returned the calls. She showed up on time. All this stuff. She checked every box. And then we get to the price, and I said, oh, by the way, how much do you charge for a trim? And I was actually stunned by the amount and pleasantly surprised, because it was $75 per horse. Not 75 for both, 75 each. Now, I always said that most farriers should be charging twice as much, because it's a high-risk job. One unruly horse can end your life or your career. People are paying for your knowledge, experience, all this stuff, transportation, everything. And, I said it in my last video, people get upset about how much to charge, because, well, at the speed you can do them, you could, make $150 an hour. Well, and I said, yeah, that might be true, but how often does that ever happen? how often do they even get to do more than one horse at a time? And then they drive for another half hour to an hour to the next place, do one horse. Drive for another hour, do one horse. And that's their day. So, and I don't know what they're driving, but in order, if they happen to be doing shoeing and, stuff like that, they'll have to carry a forge with them and all this stuff. They got to have a pickup truck. They don't get good mileage, and you need something that's reliable, so it's going to be a fairly new one, which, there's a lot of money there. All of a sudden you're looking at a $30,000, $40,000 vehicle. I don't know how much they pay for insurance, depending on where they live, per year, and then your fuel and everything else. And, you just gotta, unbelievable. And then you get into the cost of the tools, which I'm going to get into in a minute here. I'm going to talk about the tools specifically, because of some of the ones that I have. I'm not a farrier, I'm not a trimmer, but I do my own horses. I think it's my responsibility to be able to care for my own horses in absolutely every respect possible, including trimming. Because, unfortunately, I have no aversion to paying if somebody could show up reliably, do a good job, and everything else, check all the boxes. I wouldn't have a problem with that. I'd let somebody else trim my horses. But the fact of the matter is, farriers are notoriously unreliable. I don't know what it is, and I'm not the only one to say that. I've heard quite a few other people say that when they were having trouble finding people. And every time they had trouble finding people to trim their horse, I said, now do you understand why I learned to trim my own horse? It's not about, I could do this for a living if I wanted to. There was actually, last place I was living in that particular area, there was nobody else doing it. Within a 100-mile radius, I had them all to myself if I wanted to. But by that time, I had already had a couple of bad experiences that said, no, I'm not doing other people's horses. I'll do my own because mine are trained they're safe. They're well-behaved, and I'm not that fast. And it's darn hard work anyhow. I don't want to do it. It's a little bit too much for me at my age. If I was younger, maybe, but at my age now, no. I definitely am not interested in hard manual labor. And trimming horses is hard work, believe me. Well, anyhow, gets to the price this young lady charged at $75. And the lady that was getting her horses trimmed, she didn't bat an eye, which really surprised me. And I says, well, it's kind of nice to see somebody charging that much. And she goes, well, it helps to filter out the riffraff, because if they aren't willing to pay that much, I don't want to deal with them. And that's kind of, okay, that kind of makes sense, I guess. It's not quite the logic I had, but I guess it makes sense. And they, like I said, they did their job well. They're reliable and everything else. They checked all the boxes. So, and the lady that was getting her horses trimmed didn't even bat an eye. Paid the lady that did the trimming. And she says, you know what? Because after she'd left, I was talking to her and we were discussing, how much it cost. And I says, that was a little bit steep, but, I'm glad to see somebody charging that much. I've never seen anybody charge that much before. And she goes, well, you know what? By the time I paid for a trim and tip and everything else, it's only maybe $10 difference for 2 horses. So that's only $5 per horse. Now we're going right back to these people that change trimmers for $5. Well, that's absolutely ridiculous. So this lady was perfectly happy with what she got for the price. And you know what? I think, anybody out there that's a trimmer or farrier, take heed. People are willing to pay for good service. And that applies to just about anything, and I've seen it in many different industries, not just with horses, but, it doesn't matter what it is. If you got a service that is good, there are people out there that are willing to pay for it. Okay, so now I want to get into talking a little bit more about some of the tools that I use, some pros and cons of different things. And you know what? For the average Joe, even if you do not do trimming, even if you don't do your own trims, or if you're not a farrier or trimmer, which I'm sure there's lots of the art. But even if you don't trim your own horses, there's still a couple of items that I think you should probably have, in my opinion. For one thing, a hoof pick, a decent hoof pick. Actually, I found one in the store better than this one. I think I'm going to go back and buy it. It's horribly overpriced. I'd probably be better off taking the time to make my own. I could make exactly what I want, but this one is not horrible. It's got a decent sized handle on it for grip, half decent metal on the hook part so that it doesn't bend real easy. Some of them are super thin, then just the first time you use them they bend wide open. Horrible junk, not worth spending the money on. The tip shape, not bad. It's just blunt enough. You're not going to ever hurt a horse with it, but it's still sharp enough you can get into the grooves and cracks and whatnot to clean them out really good. This is a tool absolutely every one of you should have. No, there are no exceptions. Every one of you. If you got a horse, you better have a hoof pick. Absolutely. Because you should be cleaning those feet on a regular basis, because regularly cleaning them not only keeps them healthy, but during the process of cleaning them, you can inspect them for various problems. And even if you don't know how to dress them or can't, don't have the tools, don't have the facilities, at least you can see them and you know it's there and you know it needs to be done. You can call up your trimmer, your farrier, or whatever. Have them come out and take care of the problem. Now, another thing that is pretty important, I think, is a brush. Now, you can get hoof picks that have on the back side of them, there's a brush. Those things are absolutely useless. That brush is very, very soft. I don't know what you'd clean with those things. They may be good for dusting. They're so fine and soft. This one here, if it looks a little odd, I'm going to bring it in a little closer. You can get a better look at it. This little unit right here is actually a wire brush that I've cut down. That's what this thing is. That used to be a wire brush. This part here used to be quite a bit longer, and I just took a hacksaw, just chopped it off. So it makes a perfect little, I actually got a couple of these, makes a perfect little brush for cleaning the sole of the foot. Very, very handy, and not horribly expensive. A wire brush. This has actually got a really nice plastic handle. It's got a nice grip to it and everything else. You can actually buy the super cheap ones with the wooden handle, and wood, of course, is pretty easy to cut too. And those ones are only maybe a couple dollars. Really cheap. They're not expensive. So even though I cut the rest off and pretty much threw it away, actually no, I have been using parts of it. But even if you do throw it away, it doesn't matter. You're still getting this for a couple bucks, which is still pretty darn cheap. So this is something that another one of those items that the brushes that you can buy for cleaning hooves, I don't know what they're thinking when they make them. Who came up with the design or the idea? Horrible, useless. You can't clean nothing with those things. And if the dirt on the bottom of the soles gets even the slightest bit hard, it's not even going to touch it. Even this one doesn't do a super good job. It's borderline not quite good enough, but you just have to work at it a little. But it'll get the job done. And I cut it down so it's small enough you can actually get it in to where you need it, all the tight spots. That's why I've made it this small, just so you understand that part. So your brush, your hoof pick and your brush. Now another thing that I think most people should have, and very few people do, but I think most people should have, is a rasp. Because if you get cracks and chips and that sort of thing, you can fix them up, smooth them off, round them off with a rasp. And then you don't have to spend 40, 50, whatever they're charging these days, to have your farrier come out and address the problem. You can just, even if the two hooves aren't exactly the same, that's okay. It's not, this isn't perfection. We just want to keep if you got a chip or a crack or something, you want to keep it from spreading, round off the edges and the corners and everything else with one of these, and that'll help dramatically. That'll keep it from spreading. And one of the other benefits of one of these things is If it's the only tool you got, and you use it often enough, you may actually never need to call a trimmer or a farrier. You can actually, if you rasp off enough on a regular basis, this is all you need, a rasp. And I actually talked to, there was one guy who was a farrier, and his own personal horse never ever saw a pair of nippers because he never needed one. He had a small compact rasp, maybe, I don't know how big it was, much smaller than a regular one, carried it in a little pouch on his saddle, and every time he'd go to ride that horse, which I assume, he didn't say how often, but I assume it was frequent, several times a week, and before he rode that horse, he obviously cleaned out the feet every single time, and when he cleaned them, he rasped them. Just a few quick strokes. That's all it took to mimic a significant amount of wear to keep them worn down enough that he never, ever, ever had to use a set of nippers on his own horse. So you can accomplish an awful lot with one of these things. And actually, I even had a couple of people that were, in fact, trimmers, that's what they did for a living, suggest that. They said, you know, if people just a rasp, that's all you need, just a rasp. And these are not horribly expensive. Well, it varies a little. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk about, too, is the cost of tools has really gone up. And that's one of the reasons that you should not hesitate to pay well for a farrier, because they got a lot of tools to pay for. And, you know, even these things, I don't know what the store-bought hoof picks, these ones are about $8 to $10, somewhere in there. The really decent ones, and I actually saw a farrier with one of the ones that I have seen in the store that are like $30. Granted, they come with a lifetime warranty, but that's a lot of money. $30 just for a hoof pick. Had a huge handle, real big thick shank, good quality, and a lifetime guarantee. So, might have been worth the money, you know. Anyhow, so, you know, you can spend up to $30 just for a hoof pick. Now these rasps, another story too. The very first one I ever bought, $25, which I thought was, well, that's not horrible. Okay. And I went to replace it years later when it wore out. And the next one cost me $50. 5 years later, I wore that one out and I replaced it with this one. And this one's $80 just for a rasp. Now you can still get the $50 ones. They're not as good. Well, it depends how many horses you have, but I figure I've worked on things, mechanical things, and I've got quite a few tools, and I know better than to cheap out on tools. You get what you pay for, and a good quality tool, there's a very good chance that I may never have to buy another rasp in my life. My $50 one, after 5 years, I discovered that the fine side was actually cutting faster than the coarse side, and that tells me right there the coarse side is getting dull, it's worn out, it's time for a new one. And well, maybe I could have gotten a couple more years out of it, I don't know. But I figured it's hard enough work as it is, no point making it any worse. I walk into the store, they happen to have quite a few different ones to choose from. They did have a couple in that $50 range, but they also had several that were more. And I didn't know what the difference was between them. Different qualities of metal. I'm not sure. I don't know. I really don't know. Maybe nothing but the price, for all I know, because sometimes that's the case too. But I just simply thought, you know what, for the difference in price, after taxes and everything else, I'm just going to buy the most expensive one they got and be done with it. And that's exactly what I did. So this one, with taxes and everything else, about $80. That's Canadian. I'm sure it cost you a little less in the U.S. Now, one of the other things that you're going to need if you're trimming, now if you go anything more than a rasp, next thing you know, you're going to be doing nippers, and you need a hoof stand, all that stuff. We'll get into that in a minute too, though. Talk about the hoof stand, but I'm going to talk next one up. I'm going to talk about the nippers. Oh, those are cold. I'm putting my gloves on for these. They're too cold. Grabbing cold metal with bare hands. Not a good idea. Okay, my nippers. These lovely little items. Just zoom them in a little here. Let you take a good look at them. Don't ever get your finger caught in there because just the weight of the handle coming down like that, that's just the weight of the handle. That is enough to cut you bad. I actually had pants that had holes in them because of that. Not as good as they were when they were new. But then again, part of that is, can be the quality of the metal that they're made out of. Now they still, the cutting edges meet up nice and evenly. They're just not really sharp. So I'm thinking, maybe we can just sharpen them up. And as long as we can keep them straight, don't curve them or anything, which can happen when you're sharpening. You got to be careful. Maybe we can improve things, because I have noticed with these things that it does require a ridiculous amount of force to cut with them. And I was talking to one guy who has the same brand. I'm not even going to mention the brand on him. And he can actually squeeze the handles right together and not nip the hoof. That would be a problem. But these things, even though this is not the best brand from doing mechanical work, the company that makes this particular tool also makes mechanical tools. And they are a fairly respected brand. So when I come across these ones, I thought, well, hey, that brand ought to be good. And at the time, it was about the only brand out there in the stores anyhow. If you knew individuals privately, which I didn't at the time, you could buy some, or maybe you could find some online. And apparently there's some other brands that are much better. And my next pair, if there is another pair, which there might be, you never know, I will possibly buy a different brand, because I'm not super excited about these ones. And from what I've heard, this particular brand, and like I said, I'm not going to say names because there's no point in getting into that stuff, but I've talked to a number of people that actually trim for a living. And as far as they're concerned, this brand is junk. And there is another brand out there that seems to be unanimously considered to be very good quality. So you might want to shop around a little. If you ever buy a set of nippers, you might want to shop around. Oh, when it comes to price, again, these things keep going up and up and up. Man, I can't remember. I forget what the exact price was, but this is my second pair. And even now, I was just looking at the prices in the stores, and they're quite a bit more than what I paid for these ones. These ones are right around the $200 mark. They're well over $200 now. And these aren't even the best ones. So I don't even know. Maybe you can spend $300 on a good pair of nippers. Actually, there are other ones there's imported ones from other countries. There's European ones. There's all kinds of fancy. I guess it's just like chef's knives. There's the Soligen steel and Sheffield steel and all that stuff. I don't know. But okay, just remember when you're paying for a trim. Yet again, another tool. I am sure that for the really good quality ones, they're probably up around $300. So you're paying for a $300 tool, and high quality cutting tools do not last forever. Eventually, you will not be able to use them anymore, and you'll have to replace them. These things don't last forever. Okay, remember that. Same with rasps. Like I said, even just trimming my own horses, I have had to replace. This is my third one now, and $80. And there are more expensive ones than this that some of the professionals use. Trust me, I was just talking to a guy because I noticed his rasp was a little longer. It's actually about 3 inches longer than this one. And I said, hey, wait a minute, that's not normal. I could see visually that it was not the same as this one. And he says, oh yeah, that's a such and such, and it's imported, and I don't know where he got it from. Anyhow, then there's your hoof stand. Now, this is interesting. And it's not an exact science. And this is really funny. And I've heard all kinds of really interesting, creative things when it comes to hoof stands. The things that people will use, absolutely amazing. I have seen some very interesting creations that really boggle my mind. really just blow me away. But this one here, I'm just going to take the top off for a second to show you the rest of it. The basic hoof stand itself is very common. What you see here is one of the most common forms of a hoof stand that you're ever going to find, and it is generally made out of junk. The base, which as you can see, it's got a little bit of a dome to it, and it's round. This is a discar blade. Now, depending on where you live, you might not see too many of these around. In this part here, where I live, lots of farms, lots of cultivation done, lots of grains growing, and this actually mounts this like this way, vertically, on an implement that has a whole bunch of them. I'm not sure how many, 20, 30, something, I don't know. It's called a discar blade. And when they're new, they're actually a fair bit bigger in diameter, and they got some little teeth sort of things on them, and they roll through the field dragged behind a tractor on this implement, and they're at just a slight angle, and they will kind of roll the dirt, and it's another form of cultivating. And it's quite effective because these devices will cut into the dirt and roll it over quite well, and they do a pretty good job. But when the blades get worn down, they're generally discarded. In this piece here, when they get to, they're pretty much, I don't know exactly the dimension of this or how big they are when they're new, but when they get down to, the new ones are definitely quite a bit bigger. I've seen newer ones. And when they get down to approximately this size, it seems to be when they get discarded and replaced with new ones. And these ones are, in fact, garbage. But they make marvelous bases for all kinds of things. Now, the top part, piece of pipe. Any old piece of pipe. Excuse the ugly weld on there. I'm not going to show you that one. That was done where I worked. In the shop where I wasn't one of the guys working in the shop, so I didn't technically have official access to the welder, so I let somebody else do it. He actually wasn't the welder, didn't even know how to weld or the darn, but well, it's not the worst weld I've ever seen. And for something like this, you don't need an incredible amount of strength. Oh, by the way, this is hardened steel, so if you're ever trying to drill a hole in it for whatever reason, you're going to probably ruin your drill bit. But hardened steel. And another neat little tip is one of the drawbacks of using one of these things is they're nice and heavy. They got good weight to them, and you can just put your foot on top of it to hold it in place to keep it from tipping over. But heaven forbid you take your foot off and the horse pulls back. It can flip over, turn it on its side. It's sitting like this, and now you have this edge pointing up. This is hardened metal, and if you work on a cement floor a lot, and this thing slides around on a cement floor a lot, it'll actually sharpen this edge until this edge is very, very sharp. This one is not. It's fairly blunt right now. It's not a worry at all. And when I use it, I usually do it down there in the arena where it's just sand. It won't sharpen this thing up. That's not going to happen. But over time, sliding around on concrete floors, you can actually get, this edge will get pretty sharp. And I heard a little story one day. One of these things flipped over like that, and the horse actually cut its leg on the thing. So that was a bit of a hazard. But talking to one farrier, he come up with a nifty little idea how to make that thing a whole lot safer. And as a side effect, kept it from sliding around when you don't want it moving. I actually pointed that one out. He didn't even realize he'd achieved that. But what he did is his kids happened to have beginner bikes that had wheels that were about that size. And when they'd wear out one of their tires, they'd just cut the bead off with the metal in it because it makes it more difficult to put on. And he'd actually just slip it was the exact same diameter as this thing. He'd just flip it over so you had a bicycle tire around here. So this entire edge was rubber. So not only did it not slide around, it didn't get sharp, it protected the horse. Great idea, I thought. So Hoof stand, next to nothing. Actually, this one, including all the pieces of metal that I got for it and everything else, cost me a beer. That's the guy that had all this junk laying his grave. He didn't even know what this thing was, actually. Somebody else giving it to him. And then he scrounged down, found a couple of pieces of pipe. One fits perfectly inside of the other. Works really good. So anyhow, wanted to show you that. And I want to show you, well, okay, this is your basic hoof stand, what most people will have. In this area, these are very common. A hoof stand like this, made out of a disc or blade with a piece of pipe welded onto it. However, you can make one out of just about anything. And one person actually suggested what they had done is they used the agitator out of a washing machine, which is kind of gets smaller to the top and wider on the base. I thought, well, that'd work. Downside of that is pretty light, probably fall over pretty easy. One guy said he didn't like that idea because the fins on it, he liked to just, as he worked around the hoof, slide his foot around the base, and the fins actually interfered with that. Well, that would probably also be a problem on the store-bought ones, because there's a couple of companies that actually make professional hoof stands. And I can't remember what the one brand is. I don't remember the other, but I'm not going to mention it anyhow. Doesn't matter. You can buy them, actual professional hoof stands made for doing that. Lots of people use them, but I guess they don't have friends with a welder and disc or blades laying around. Because they're not cheap. But they do have a couple of advantages. You can usually mount a couple magnets on them to just stick your tools on the side, holds your tools for you. I've seen that a lot. I think that's an option, actually. I have magnets I have not installed on this one yet. I'm going to be doing that eventually. And I think I might make weld on a couple little pieces of tubing to stick my hoof pick into, and my brush, that sort of thing. Anyhow, one of the other things in the store-bought ones, they all come with a sling attachment for the top. You can use it just like this, where you just set the hoof on top, or you want the hoof upside down. They have a sling mechanism similar to this. A little better, actually. This one, I used what I had, and I actually discovered some design flaws. Unfortunately, I made it wide enough that I thought, I don't want to limit how big a hoof you can put on it. So I want to make it big enough that even if you get a draft, you can still put that thing on there. Well, as it turns out, that's not a good idea. Making it wide, the wider you make it, the longer this piece is, and the longer this piece is, the more it can rock back and forth like that. I'll just get that up close to the camera so you can see it. It just rocks back and forth. It's just like a swing, okay? And when you get a hoof in there, that's what happens. It rocks back and forth. It doesn't hold it nice and stable as I was hoping it would, which was the goal. But this is what I had. I had some of this strapping, that width laying around. This stuff is really strong. No horse hoof on there is ever going to hurt that stuff. I think that's actually a cargo strap rated for about 3,000 pounds or something. I don't know. You're not going to hurt it anyhow. You're not going to break that sucker. The metal was what was laying around. This pipe was actually my buddy gave to me. It was, like I said, he just happened to have a piece the right size to go inside. Perfect. So what I would do with the next one, I would actually make 2 changes to the design. Like I said, the store-bought ones, they come with something similar to this. Not quite as wide, and the strap is a little bit wider. And those are the 2 changes I would make. Only I would probably go even a little further than what they do. This is a 2-inch. I think I'd probably go minimum 3, if not 4-inch, and I would narrow it up a little so that there's none of this action like this where it can rock back and forth. And you can see that. I'm trying to do this as many different angles as possible so you get the idea how that can happen. Okay. That way. See? Oh, that's actually a good view there. Yeah. Anyhow, so I'm going to make this part, make it wider this direction, and I'm going to make it a little narrower this direction. Make this maybe just a tiny bit tighter so that the hoof doesn't go down in as far, so it doesn't have to be as wide. I can make it narrower this way because the hoof isn't actually going to go down into it as far, which also means that it's going to hold the hoof up further away from this piece while I'm going around it with a rasp or nippers or whatever. Less chance of hitting this thing with my tools and damaging it, because one of the things I learned over the years, and this is why hoof pick and brush, extremely important, and you can use them thoroughly, because when you start nipping or rasping, one thing that I learned is these are a very, very precision cutting edge on here. These are very precision, and the slightest amount of gravel or dirt or whatever will dull and damage them. And that's why it's extremely important to use your brush and your hoof pick and clean that hoof as good as possible before you start nipping. Otherwise, you're going to damage these things, and that's a lot. These are a lot of money. And so if you're doing your own trims, keep that in mind. That's something I learned a long time ago when it came to cutting blades, whether it's a knife, a drill bit, or whatever. Anything that has a hardened steel cutting blade on it, that blade, that cutting edge, needs to be protected. If you don't take good care of it, it's going to be damaged, it's going to be dulled, it's going to wear away, and you're going to have a problem. It's going to make your work a lot harder, and your tool isn't going to last as long. If you look after it, your tool will last a lot longer, and when good ones are $300 a pop, you want to look after them. You want to make sure you take care. Now, I have seen some farriers and trimmers that I don't know if they even actually use a hoof pick before they start nipping. I've seen some practices where I've watched them where guys would actually chomping through the dirt with these things, and I don't know if they just don't understand what damage they're doing, or they just don't care. They just want to get the job done, and if they have to buy another set, they buy another set. It's just an expensive business. I don't know what the theory is behind that, why they do that, but I have actually seen a lot of people where they will actually cut through dirt and debris with their nippers, and I don't know why they do it, but I do know for a fact that that is doing damage to them and wearing them out. It is going to dull them, and they aren't going to last as long. So that is why your brush and your hoof pick are the friends of your nippers and your rasp. Because you'll even notice on this one, this thing's, I've only used it a couple times. It's fairly new. And you'll even notice in here there's a little bit of, it's clogged up a bit. Little trick with that one is because my hoof brush is in fact a wire brush, I can also use it for cleaning my rasp. And you go crossways, because if you go this way, you're going to dull your blade. You're going to dull the rasp. But if you go crossways, you can clean the dirt out of the teeth. And when the hooves are exceptionally bad, sometimes you can't clean it out very well with the hoof pick, and you'll end up with a lot of crap in your rasp. Don't leave that in. If you leave it in, it's not going to work as well. But you can clean them out. You can clean them out with a wire brush. And whether it's a full one or one that's been chopped down that you use for cleaning your hooves, which I already have, and it's handy, it's right beside it, guess what I use? Okay, so anyhow, just thought I'd talk about some of the tools that I use, some of the things, like I said, trial and error. We just made up a sling out of some junk to mimic what you can buy, and this whole thing cost me nothing. Well, okay, I sort of paid for that pipe, sort of, but the rest of it was junk. This was actually part of a cargo strap that I found laying on the ground. I picked up because I know this stuff comes in handy, and a couple of used bolts to bolt it on, a couple of scrap pieces of metal that were laying around. I welded together and welded onto the pipe, and boom, there you go. But like I said, design flaw. that's okay. I'll learn. Next one I might actually have to pay to get what I want, but I think I know there's a place that actually makes custom straps, and I think they would have large rolls of the material, the stock material, in various dimensions, and I'll just go get a piece the size I need in the width that I want, and then it's just a matter of finding some metal that I can use that would be the appropriate width. And I have one more piece of pipe the right size. I can still make another one of these, and it'll be better than the last one. So like I said, it's a great idea. Prior to this, what I was doing is, rather than trying to hold the leg up, I actually was using a feed pail, turn it upside down, and lay the hoof on top of that. And being that they're made out of rubber, if I happen to hit it with the nippers or rasp or whatever, it wasn't going to hurt anything, because it's a pretty innocuous material. So anyhow, I think we've covered everything. Some of the tools that I use, the cost of them. Don't be cheap when it comes to paying for a farrier, because remember, they gotta pay for all this stuff. And those the professional hoof stands that they make, that a lot of them are using, those things are, I don't know, a couple hundred, maybe $300. I don't know what they cost. Oh, that was one other thing I forgot to mention is you'll notice that most farriers actually have a leather apron, well, a bib style chaps. They're like two separate legs, and then there's bib in the middle, a whole bunch of pockets for their tools. And little tip on that one, I think I mentioned it once before, is and I haven't seen them recently, but I'm going to shop around a little more, a couple more stores. The one that used to have them doesn't have them anymore. They got the apron style, not the chap style, which I much prefer. I have the apron style ones, but they're actually welders. They're made for welders. And the last time I saw those things in the store, they were only about $35, $40. I talked to one farrier, and I was actually kind of shocked. Apparently, the ones that are actually specifically made for farriers, they're designed with the pockets for their tools and everything else. They're nice, thick, heavy leather, and they can easily run $400. So one more expense. So regardless what they charge you, don't hesitate to pay it. Don't question it. Just pay it. It's worth it. You know, they got hundreds and hundreds of dollars, actually tens of thousands of dollars if you include their vehicle, their gas, their transportation, insurance, etc., etc. There's an awful lot of expenses in the business that they got to recoup somehow. They're trying to make a living doing this stuff, and you know, don't think that they're making a lot of money because of how much they charge. You have to remember there's always that ridiculous amount of travel time in between each trim. And I have even seen guys that would travel quite literally 1,000 miles to do trims. In fact, I just saw a guy just out here recently. He was from 2 provinces away. The area that he was from, I believe it was well over 1,000 miles. Anyhow, fortunately, he had about 6 or 7 horses to do all in one spot. Thank goodness. That helps make it worthwhile, and I'm sure he made a few other stops on his way to and from to serve a few other clients as well. So his trip was not in vain, but it seems rather absurd that people, and there was another one, they got somebody from 2 provinces the other direction to come do their trims. So I don't know what's going on. But when you got to get people from 1,000 miles away to come trim your horses, you better smarten up and start treating them a little better so they want to come back. Have a good day.